Right, we're going to move on to the next section of the right back analysis. So, freight trains. You can't knock down a freight train. You can try and knock Trent Alexander-Arnold down, but you can't knock down a freight train. The human equivalent, or the footballing or right back equivalent of a freight train, Mo. I'm so pleased that Jake flagged this up as the example of the legend freight train, Cafu, because he's one of my all-time favourites, an absolute legend of a player. So he's the legend that we're looking to hold up as the pinnacle, and the current contemporaries that we're throwing around as the examples of freight trains are Reece James and Achraf Hakimi for Paris Saint-Germain. So it's a different skill set to the playmaker, and it's definitely going to be a different skill set to the shutdown defensive fullback that we're going to talk about a bit later. This is about an ability to get the ball and just bomb up and down, back and forward, up and down. So the stats that we're looking at for this are touches in the opposition box, take-ons completed, and dribbling. So Reece James, pretty strong in this area. We know he's had his injury issues this season, but Achraf Hakimi, from basically turning down Real Madrid's contract to go into Inter Milan to then making the big move to PSG, he's gone from strength to strength to strength. And as a freight train, as an unstoppable freight train, he's a big, strong candidate.
I mean, yeah, he is. And to go back to Cafu, the reason why I'm always the one that says these fullbacks are kind of fullbacks of freight trains. Ironically, of course, Cafu's nickname, appropriately, not ironically, his nickname is Il Pendolino, which is an express train. So he literally was nicknamed the express train because he would go up and down, up and down, up and down. And that's the defining aspect of fullback. I use freight train because it's more evocative and it sounds better to say and it sounds more intense, which is it. But, obviously, in practice, pendolinos are fast and freight trains are not fast. But anyway, essentially, Cafu is the ideal, right? And this is, anyone remembers Cafu, or Javier Zanetti is another great example back in the day, the 90s style fullback. This is what, and Maicon was a great example. And this is why the likes of Trent and Dani Alves often get knocked down, because they're compared to these guys who are up and down, up and down, up and down in straight lines. Like their heat maps are just these very thin, very intensely colored lines up the side of the pitch. Because that's what they do. They get up and down, and they defend very well and they attack very well. But then obviously their attacking is the basic kind of fullback attacking, where they get into the box, they provide little crosses, little passes across, cutbacks, score goals, take shots at goal, stuff like that. So in that instance, they are huge parts of their team's attacks, but it's not the same. But it is still deadly effective. Like Cafu and Zanetti, I said, great examples. And then, like you mentioned, Hakimi is the great instance. Reece James, I think, is an interesting case because in many ways he doesn't appear to be a freight train because he can play central midfield, he can play right side of centre back. You're thinking this guy's a playmaker, but then you watch him play on the wing as a wing back, and he's just a pure freight train. Just runs up and down, very orthodox. He's fantastic. He's already got 5 goals this season as a right back. No fullback has more, and he's been injured like half the season. So. He's really special, but Hakimi is the one. Hakimi is the Don Dada. I still can't. I can't wrap my head around why Real Madrid sold him, because you look at Dani Carvajal, you look at Lucas Vazquez, and you're thinking, you guys need a right back. You had literally one of the next great right backs in the world on your team come through a youth system. Why did you sell him? What's wrong with you? It's very strange. He was so good at Dortmund on loan from Real Madrid. It was just like, why would you then sell him? It doesn't make any sense. And yeah, Hakimi's amazing. Since 2018-19, he's had 363 touches in the opposition box. That's more than any right back. He's attempted 288 take-ons, ridiculous amount of take-ons, and he scored 17 goals. He's 17 goals as a right back. And he doesn't take set pieces, he doesn't take penalties, doesn't take free kicks. He's really quite great. I mean, Mbappe famously shouted him out as the best right back in the world. I'm not sure about that, Kylian, but he's really good. He's so spectacular to watch.
I think if Mbappe does go to Liverpool this summer, maybe he might have himself a little rethink. But we'll leave that for the transfer gossip merchants. Josh, do you think again this is a little bit of a perception argument? We talked about Trent and Cancelo before, and the comparisons with Alves. James and Hakimi are maybe edging back to more the traditional model. As Mo said, this idea that the heat map is generally, not to be disingenuous, a fairly straight line of I am quicker than the person in front of me. I'm probably quicker than my opposite fullback. I can power past them. I can get crosses into the box. I can impact the game due to my ability to carry the ball progressively over long distances. Reece James has shown that to good effect. He's obviously had a couple of injury issues this season, but Achraf Hakimi with PSG is an outstanding example of how that type of fullback can still flourish in 2022?
Yeah, well, I think this is more of the traditional way we view fullbacks. Being good both ways, and traditionally as well, I think a fullback has always been a very physical player. Very physically good in terms of having that engine to get up and down all day, having the engine to showcase a bit of recovery pace when calls high up the field, having the energy to overlap and underlap. And I think these are more in the mould of what we would traditionally view as really top elite fullbacks. But having said that, I do think that these players, I do think that they're gradually being influenced by the likes of Trent and by Cancelo, because I do think James and Hakimi do have that. I mean, 10 years ago, we would probably be talking about them in a similar way to we're talking about Trent now, maybe, in terms of their ability on the ball, but particularly the passing ability. Reece James is so comfortable in possession, his first touch is flawless, and his delivery into the box in terms of crosses is really, really dangerous at times. It's maybe not as difficult to defend as Trent, but in terms of him being an attacking, outlet for his team to use, he's absolute top quality. So I think these fullbacks are kind of, I mean, very, very similar across the board anyway, but these are more in the traditional mould, very, very physical. But then also you've got to combine that with the modern influence of how the role's developed tactically and how it's become more of a playmaking role. I think they're gradually adopting elements of that.
Do you think, again, we keep talking about perceptions, Mo, in terms of the way these fullbacks are measured or measured against each other? The playmaker idea of Trent and Cancelo, and then this freight train idea of James and Hakimi. When you stretch out some of the numbers in terms of what it means to be a fullback currently in 2022, there's more than one way to skin a cat, as the old expression goes. And some data that we've got from FB Ref illustrates that. That's just based on this season. As a Premier League defender, nobody has a higher dribble success rate than Reece James. He's top 74%, not just fullbacks, any defender, including a progressive centre-back. And then Hakimi in Ligue 1 is the top defender for touches in the opposition box and for progressive passes, so from passing from the defensive half into the attacking half. Trent and Cancelo are fantastic at what they do, but when you're playing against a multitude of different defensive systems, you need a fullback that's able to do different things to break them down. If you're dealing with a low block or you're dealing with a high press, you need different ways to break through and impact the game.
It all depends on what system of play you decide to go with as a team, right? This is the thing. So, for example, I don't think Trent would be very good in Chelsea's system because Chelsea's system is wing backs, right? And so that would mean Trent would automatically start the match higher up the pitch. There'd be fewer spaces that he likes to roam into to really function, right? He could do it, but it wouldn't be quite as effective. Whereas I think someone like Reece James really benefits from being in as a wing back. It lets him get forward with a lot more confidence. I mean, he can still defend and everything, but it lets him have a lot more attacking confidence. And look at PSG. PSG is a great example of what's something that should really work brilliantly, but doesn't really, but it should do. Like Messi playing on the right, it should be tailor-made for a fullback that just hurtles down the line beyond him, getting into the box, which Hakimi does. And Hakimi does well, but it has, obviously, because PSG have had their own issues this season, it hasn't really clicked. And I think that's another reason, by the way, why Hakimi hasn't been more lauded. Because, again, as much as I think Trent is the absolute gold standard, Hakimi is the best freight train style fullback that there is. The poster boy of the freight trains, absolutely. And he would be much more highly regarded if he didn't play for PSG, who no one really watch or care about or even like. So apology to you if you are a PSG fan, but it's true. And so it's a shame really because Trent is so. Hakimi is phenomenal. He's genuinely like when you watch him run, he's built like I don't even know what he's built like. There's no footballers that are built like that. He's massive, but he's built like a sprinter, Olympic sprinter. He looks like he could run the 100 meters. Probably could run the 100 meters in very very good time, sub 10, I would imagine at least. He's amazing, and it's like watching him in transition. I think for me the most fun I've ever had watching Kimi was when he played for Dortmund, because playing for Dortmund in that team with Haaland and watching those two just streak up the pitch together on counterattacks was just genuinely thrilling. They're so quick, and at PSG he just needs him. I mean, him and Mbappe, you'd love to see them do that sort of thing, but they just don't seem to get together for whatever reason. But Hakimi is great, and perception-wise, it's like, how can I say this? If he played for a more beloved club, he would be getting a lot more recognition, put it that way.